We are paid, that's all. We are God.
Yo guys! I'm Yuruzi and this is part 9 of What If Naruto Sends Himself Back in Time to Fix His Mistakes. Naruto, at 26, has lived through 10 years of war. At the end, with nothing left to call home, he sends himself back to the beginning, to the day of his younger self's graduation, in an attempt to change it all. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe and check the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 9, Part 2. The two Jonin meandered their way through the village as the sun began to set, casting an orange and pink glow across the sky. Both men had been quiet along the way, preferring to reflect on their own thoughts rather. Asuma for his part kept stealing glances at Haruki as subtly as he could. It was evident that he was contemplating something about the redhead and was just trying to think of a way to bring it up, or even if he should bring it up. Haruki though didn't even notice. He kept walking, eyes far away and staring at the dirt with a neutral face. His legs moved as if he was on autopilot. He was so engrossed in his conversation with Kurama about what was coming and how they would handle the dinner that he jumped when Asuma touched him on his shoulder. It was only then that he realized the bearded man had tried to talk to him. "Sorry, Asuma, I was lost in thought. I wasn't trying to ignore you," Haruki said as he rubbed the back of his head sheepishly with a small grin. Asuma though just smiled and brushed off his apology with wave of his hand while his eyes followed Haruki's movement carefully. A spark of some kind appeared in the back of his eyes that Haruki couldn't quite place, but, just as he saw it, it was gone, the bearded man looking away as they continued to walking, turning down another street. "It's alright. I can understand why you were distracted. I'm sure you will be fine though. You wouldn't be a very good undercover agent if you couldn't handle a political dinner. Besides, you seem to have handled yourself in that arena well so far." The redhead just sighed in reply, though he seemed to relax a bit. "Good thought, Asuma. I've never been one to enjoy formal event like this, especially when I was younger. And the Hyuga in particular are big on pomp and circumstance. Their obsessive hold on their traditions has caused more damage to their clan than any good that ever came from them could undo. On top of that, they are masters of subtlety, and politics isn't my most enjoyable pastime. No doubt they will probe me if for no other reason than because of my new position. That's the difference. As a spy, I didn't have to and was never expected to be myself, just whatever person I was supposed to be. And even my job was to remain unnoticed, and rarely was my opinion even matter, let alone an honored guest. It was just easier not having to be seen, something I've found trouble doing now that I'm back." There was a small pause before the dark-haired man replied in a very light-hearted tone, "Somehow I feel you are talking about more than a simple dinner." Asuma would give the man credit. The only visible reaction was the subtle tension in his shoulders, though given his current attire and his rather impressive physique, it would be hard to hide. Deciding to take his next steps careful, he still wanted answers after all, and talking to the redhead seemed to be working. Asuma didn't look at the man and instead pulled out a cigarette from a vest pouch and a lighter from his pocket. Asuma noticed the tension begin to recede from the redhead, who was no doubt watching him closely after his comment. He took that as a positive sign and decided to move forward. "Well, anyway, no need to talk about that even if I'm right. I know you will be fine because I've watched you successfully navigate the council and outmaneuver Donzo of all people, and anyone who's capable of that is a better politician than my father." Haruki just snorted at that but let the comment go and continued to walk before suddenly turning his head as if suddenly remembering something. "Hey, were you trying to ask me something? I never actually confirmed what you were trying to say." Blue eyes looked quizzically and the bearded Jonin while he took a drag, never looking at the redhead, face fairly relaxed and neutral, but with a hint of something Haruki couldn't quite place. "Here's my chance. Now or never," Asuma thought. "Oh, that all I had asked to you is how you were related to Naruto." The redhead immediately stopped walking and there suddenly was a presence in the air as if it was alive. It felt akin to being in the middle of a beehive or maybe an electrical storm before the first bolt of lightning had actually struck. Asuma stopped walking a step after Haruki and the hair on the back of his neck stood up in warning. There was no one around on this stretch of the road. Yet when he looked at the redhead, Haruki had a small smile on his face and a quizzical look on his face. "What makes you ask?" he replied with legitimate curiosity seeping into his voice. Despite Haruki's seemingly calm demeanor, it was very evident by the feel of his chakra, the way his body was subtly coiled and the surroundings that made it quite clear to Asuma that his next words should be spoken very carefully. After briefly weighing his options and concluding that honesty was the best way forward, if something is up it's best he's aware others are catching on, Asuma replied. Honestly, it's really just curiosity and it helps me understand you better. They were questionable coincidence at first, but after seeing the two of you together it's impossible not to see them. A random jonin returns from a long-term mission right after the Jinchuriki and pariah of the village is scheduled to graduate and you get the apartment right next to his. You have a heavy influence in his and his classmates lives out of nowhere. You have the Hokage's ear more than most jonin that have spent their entire lives around the man, and that's before getting into the physical similarities. He paused for a moment to take another drag from his cigarette and give the redhead time to process what he had just said. Haruki didn't move or reply, just stared steadily with his cerulean gaze piercing directly to his heart. Asuma didn't care, in fact he was glad, he had nothing to hide. Then there is the face, that your eyes are almost the same shade and your face structure is very similar, you're just missing his birthmarks. On top of all of this, you have the same affinities. But what really inspired the connection was the look of utter conviction that he gave me while you were changing. I know where I've seen that look. Asuma paused again, this time to send the redhead a very pointed look with a smirk. After a moment of no reply, Asuma just shrugged and casual kicked his foot into the dirt. The easiest way to explain all this is that you have some sort of relation to the boy that he seems unaware of. And your reaction to the topic is telling enough. You're too young to be his father. Are you an uncle, cousin or something? Haruki looks at Asuma for another long moment as if weighing him. The presence then suddenly vanishes and the redhead continues walking, seemingly having come to a decision of sorts. Something like that, he says nonchalantly as he keeps walking down the road. Asuma blinks for a moment before rushing to catch up. Well, it's at least a partial answer. It's very important though that you keep this observation to yourself. Tell no one. The weight of his words was not lost on the bearded jonin, even thought they were said in a light tone. Curiously he asked, not even Kakashi. The redhead snorted, especially not Kakashi. Asuma frowns slightly at that but nods. For now, he would trust that the reasons were important enough to comply. If his father knew this, which he no doubt did, then there was a very good reason they had been quiet about it. The following silence did not last long, as if Haruki apparently didn't want him dwelling on the topic any longer. How's the team's training? Not a very subtle deflection. Asuma thought before replying. Well, I'm pretty sure they are almost a completely new team. Shikamaru has been more active and eating more, even going so far as to train on his own. They all have really. Choji is doing endurance training like you suggested, and Ino has been practicing her regulation for days. That mission really opened their eyes to what they could be capable of with a little effort. My only concern is that this motivation will taper off in time. Haruki smiled at the news though shrugged indifferently by the end. It probably will, knowing those three, which is why it has to be followed up. Asuma turned and almost dropped the cigarette out of his mouth. I thought you told them they were not going to be doing a mission like that so soon. The man was beginning to worry his students would actually plan his assassination if that wasn't true. Haruki just chuckled at his reaction. No. Nothing like that. I have a motivator planned for each one of them. As far as training goes, I plan to give each of them a weapon, their affinity, and expand their foundation jutsu. Ino will be the hardest. Why do you say that? Because I plan on having her merge her clan jutsu with her affinity and genjutsu. Two of those are already difficult for me to help her with, and the last maybe as well, depending on what it is. Then why have her take this route? I can certainly see the benefits. Making it so your opponents can't tell if what they are feeling is real, is the basic concept of genjutsu, combined with the other two will always keep them guessing. But if you can't help her, then why point her in that direction? Even if I couldn't help her, I would always point her in the direction to be the best she can be. That is our task, to train the next generation beyond what we can do ourselves. But our task can't actually be accomplished if they don't take the steps to succeed themselves. It's not my job to hand her answers, it's our job to help her find her own in her abilities. Haruki paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. And I didn't say I couldn't help her. To pull off this path she will need the highest degree of chakra regulation. Which doesn't come naturally to her but is something we both can help her with. As she masters the respective pieces and additional tasks we give her, she will get there. Asuma huffed with a smirk, eyeing the redhead, bemused. You just have it all figured out, don't you? Haruki snorted as they turned down the last road that led to Kurenai's apartment but didn't say anything. Asuma, noting where they were, decided it was time to put out his cigarette and stomped on it. Haruki didn't seem fazed by this at all, if anything he seemed amused. The reason being he wouldn't want Kurenai any more frustrated with him than necessary when he gives her present to her. Considering the conversation, he found himself excited for tomorrow and even more pumped to train his students. Stealing one last glance at the redhead, Asuma could help but wonder what was in store for them tomorrow. He had gotten some answers today and some new questions to match, but there would be time in the future to address those. For now he could be there for his friend and let things lie. Haruki, can I ask you one last question? You just did, but fire away. Asuma rolled his eyes at the childish quib, and focused on what had been nagging him. Did you tell or influence my old man to select me for the mission? Haruki seemed to think on that for a moment before stopping and turning to look Asuma, who had also stopped, in the eye. I will not deny that the Hokage discussed with me all the possible options for escorts, and while I did lobby some for you given your skills and position on multiple levels, it remains the Hokage's decision, and in no way should my involvement diminish that. There were other candidates that could do the job just as well. As they approached the apartment, on the ground floor waiting in front of her door was Guy, still dressed in his standard Jonin attire. Now do you want to deliver these to Guy or will I? Asuma stared directly into his eyes. What do you think the answer to that is? He almost physically cringed in mock disgust. Haruki rolled his eyes in exasperation. I told you this would happen. It's a good thing I got these extras. Turning, he handed the packages to Asuma. Here, you take these to Kurenai while I deal with Guy. Make sure to give her your present, he said with a wink as Asuma just averted his gaze before walking off. Well, at least tonight won't be boring, Haruki says to himself as he watches an exuberant Guy greet Asuma while Kurenai answers the door. Little did he know just how right he was. To say Guy was having a good day would be an understatement. His students were progressing well, his star pupil was healed, he himself had had a very productive training session, and now he had the opportunity to get to know the man who was responsible for most of his good mood. Haruki's actions earlier that morning had been unexpected, and frankly at first Guy wasn't very happy with them. But as Haruki explained and tested his students, the magnitude of their weakness was revealed. It wasn't as if he didn't see the signs. He knew they were arrogant, but the severity of the case was far worse when it was demonstrated in front of him. Ten had been baited so easily that she didn't even think to use the exploding tags she had on her to try and hit him, or even process the reason for her lack of success. Niji had kept his calm throughout the exercise and had showed respect, and so the severity of his case would be easily missed if you didn't know what you were looking for. It was the overwhelming evidence of his performance. He may not say it, but Niji relied almost exclusively on his eyes as if they were infallible. And considering his belief system of fate, he probably still struggles with it a bit. Then there is Lee. Lee was Guy's own fault if he was honest. So eager to prove himself and overcome everyone's doubts, he had launched himself on a quest that just wasn't realistic. Guy had absolute faith in Lee that he would give it his all and that he could become a top-tier shinobi. He saw so much of himself in Lee. It was this fact that no doubt prevented him from seeing the failure he was setting Lee up for. Now, thanks to the red-haired walking miracle, that wasn't a problem anymore. Guy smiled as he thought of that moment and the hope that had shined in Lee's eyes, then frowned as his thoughts returned to the one responsible for it. Something wasn't right with their newly returned friend, and whatever it was, it seemed to be weighing on him greatly. The latest shifts of responsibility and difficult tasks would stress anyone, sure. But there was something deeper, something that seemed always just under the surface but out of reach. Thankfully, there seemed to have been improvement in recent days. Or at least from what he has observed. Hopefully their excursion tonight would provide even more light into who his new friend is. Guy was then broken from his thoughts when he saw a noticeable tuft of red hair round the corner at the end of the street. Speaking of the devil. And he wasn't alone, it seemed. Asuma was with him. Guy shrugged to himself as he decided he would find out the details of this interaction later. So without further ado, the eccentric Jonin rushed over to greet his two compatriots. Greetings Haruki-san, Asuma-san, on this most youthful evening. I did not realize you also were teaching a Hyuga, Asuma. Guy half stated, half asked. Asuma's bored expression at Guy's actions vanished into a panicked, embarrassed stuttering. As he stood there waving his arms around like an idiot, particularly with the expensive dress, which he then realized he was waving in the middle of his blabbering, and tried to hide behind himself. As amusing as the scene was, Haruki decided to rescue Asuma, but just as he tried to speak there was a cough from behind Guy. The resulting silence was only broken by the intake of breath by the three males present. For behold, it was Kurenai standing behind Guy in a light blue dress that complemented her curves nicely. Haruki was the first to recover with a smile. Well, at least one of you two is aware of the requirements of an evening like this. He looked pointedly at Guy. Guy, now broken from the spell, had the decency to look at himself and then sheepishly chuckle in embarrassment, having forgotten the formality of the occasion. Kurenai couldn't help but laugh into her hand a little at all of their faces, and even further at Haruki's comment with a small blush. It was then she took note of the parcels Haruki and Asuma were carrying. Guy, recovering from his embarrassment, cleared his throat and looked at Kurenai as he took his parcel from Haruki and bowed slightly in thanks. Kurenai-san, would it be alright if I change in a spare bathroom? I seem to have forgotten the severity of the occasion. Kurenai just smiled and nodded before, in a swirl of wind and dust, Guy dashed past her into her apartment and was gone before anyone could blink. Everyone coughed in the dust as it settled. Kurenai sighed in frustration as now all her painstaking labor to get ready had been diminished. She looked up, though, hearing someone approach. Haruki looked at her with a small smile and handed her a decorated yellow box with a lavender ribbon on it. Don't worry so much. I think you will be changing anyway, he said with a wink before gesturing over with his head at the clearly uncomfortable, nervous Asuma. And with that, Haruki stepped around her and let himself in, presumably to check on Guy. Kurenai mildly wondered why she found herself completely okay with that, but decided to contemplate it later when Asuma approached her. The bearded jonin was obviously nervous, but she decided to have mercy and not comment on it. In actuality, she was grateful to Haruki for giving them a moment in private. Hey Kurenai, I know we had decided to take things slow, but it's been a few months and I never got a chance to give you a congratulation gift on being a jonin, and I just wanted to be nice, and it was your size at the perfect price, Asuma began after clearing his throat. Though he trailed off as he realized he was rambling. Quickly but carefully he handed her the parcel that included the dress. Kurenai accepted the gift with a small blush and thanks, and was very curious as to what it was. As soon as she opened the top, looking inside, she stopped, and just stared at it. Asuma almost lost his marbles at that moment and had to use every drop of willpower he had not to apologize immediately and curse Haruki for his terrible advice. After a few more moments, he couldn't bear it anymore and went to open his mouth. Only before he could speak, he was interrupted by a squeal and the feeling of lips touching his own. His brain took a moment to process what was happening before he returned it as best he could briefly before she pulled away and was visibly bouncing up and down as she hugged him. In his head, Asuma was doing a victory dance. Haruki, I will never doubt you again. After Kurenai had calmed down a little bit, she turned to ask Asuma details when the door behind them opened. Quickly separating, he too looked at the door, trying not to blush as Guy and Haruki stepped out again. Guy was dressed in a dark green kimono with light blue imperial-style dragon winding up the back. Now he really did embody his name as Konoha's sublime blue beast. Thank you, Kurenai. I think I am much more presentable now. Guy says, giving a beaming smile and a nice guy pose. Kurenai simple nods while Haruki sighs. Haruki looks at her though with a smirk and says, Asuma, why don't you help Kurenai gather her gifts while she changes? Asuma just nods in gratitude for the excuse and the two slip inside for a minute. The remaining two jonin stood in a comfortable silence for a minute. One clearly observing the other, and the latter was too caught up in his own preparatory thoughts to notice or care. Finally, Guy broke the silence. Thank you. Haruki blinked at the statement as he was drawn back from his chaotic thoughts. The reed head turned and looked at Guy, who was staring at the sunset over the rooftops, before tilting his head in a perplexed manner. Don't mention it, Guy. But what are you thanking me for exactly? Guy smiles as if catching an inside joke before looking over at Haruki, and I'm sorry too. Sorry for what? Should I be aware of something? Haruki said, actually confused now. Was this about the outfit? I am thanking you for your involvement in my students. For addressing their true needs as if they were your own, and in was that I could not or worse would not do so. And it is that unyouthful truth that I must also apologize for. I should have been more supporting to you in training today and addressed the concerns you pointed out sooner. I promise it will not happen again, or I will run from Como and back on only my hands, and if I cannot do that, then I'll However, before Guy could continue what was no doubt a lengthy list of punishment goals for disciple, Haruki raised a hand with a resolved expression. Enough, Guy. That's truly unnecessary. You are not the first sensei to be blinded by love for his students, and you will certainly not be the last. That fact alone means you are already an amazing sensei. There is not a sensei I know of that has more passion in training with their students than you, and that is due to the love you have for them. All of them. So quit with this apologetic bullshit and remember that sometimes the best way to love them is to be real with them, Haruki said with a bit of frustrated passion at the end. Sighing, Haruki took a moment to let Guy digest his answer before continuing. Guy, I'm not some master teacher or genius at being a sensei. All I did was compliment what you are already doing. You are doing most of the work. So chin up, man, and take some credit for getting that group this far. Haruki finished with a genuine smile and a thumbs up at Guy, who was speechless. Sobering up after a moment's thought, Guy smiles back at Haruki and nods to the redhead. Yosh. Thank you, Haruki-kun. Further conversation was halted though as the door to the apartment once again opened. What came out was a giddy and stunning Kurenai, now wearing the dress that she got earlier, followed by a madly blushing Asuma. The remaining join neglected to comment on the pair, but as Asuma looked at Haruki's face he could tell that this was not the last he would be hearing of this. All of a sudden, there was a bright flash and his vision swam with spots, finally clearing to see Haruki standing there with a camera with a shit-eating grin. Asuma turned to see Kurenai next to him in a similar condition though. Anko is going to love these. Asuma heard, and that did it. In a burst of speed, the bearded jonin lunged for the now laughing redhead, who had aptly dodged and was now hastily make a retreat up and over the building, laughing the entire way. Get back here, Haruki, and give me that camera. Oh come on Asuma, you'll want the memory, besides Anko is going to find out eventually anyway. Not the least bit deterred by Haruki's statement, the bearded jonin continues his breakneck pace after the redhead, leaving Kurenai and Guy staring after them. The former just sighed in frustration. At this rate we will be late for the dinner. No we won't, a familiar voice said behind them as they whipped their heads around to the source. Finding none other than Haruki standing there, both jonin took a moment of confusion before saying simultaneously, Kage Bunshin? Haruki just grinned. Kage Bunshin. Laughing, the trio quickly decided they had already suffered enough delays and it wouldn't be good to keep their hosts waiting, so they started their way toward the Hyuga compound, each convinced that tonight would be an event to remember. Earlier at the Hyuga compound. Inside the Hyuga main house dojo, Hinata and Hanabi were currently having the final spar of their evening training session. Since this was not a progression test day, the usual entourage of onlookers was absent, with only Ko to supervise. Both girls were panting from the exertion of the spar, but Hanabi was looking significantly worse for the wear in comparison to her sister panting. The spar had started out as it usually did, with Hanabi taking her sister a bit more seriously after the recent upset in the last spar. This trend quickly faded though, as Hanabi rationalized her sister's previous victory as a fluke rather than actual skill. It was then that Hanabi got sloppy and started to run her mouth again, degrading her sister's performance and going after this Haruki-sensei's teachings. Hinata, however, didn't take the bait. In fact, it appeared to Ko that she had actually planned for this to happen. He noticed her stance subtly shift that maximized her flexibility. It was after this shift that things quickly swung back in Hinata's favor, though Hanabi didn't realize it at the time, and Ko, despite his excitement at seeing Hinata's improvement, remained silent and stone-faced so as to not tip her hand before she was ready. What happened next was quite a sight to behold to Ko. Hanabi couldn't land blow. Hinata just continued to weave around her strikes or redirect them as became necessary. She never tried an attack of her own, and he never struck at Hanabi. All she did was dance around her sister with a face of serious determination and focus. It didn't appear that it was easy for her either. Hanabi was unable to recognize that she had already followed into Hinata's trap. She continued to strike, fueled by her frustration of her sister's attitude and her ability to avoid her. Coward! She yelled, face me! Hinata stayed silent and bent out of the way of a lunge and then cartwheeled away from a low kick to sweep her legs. Springing off the ground, she spun in the air before landing on her feet in a ready position, relaxed but breathing heavily. Hanabi had just about lost the last of her patience. She was tired and panting with sweat pouring from her face. Here they heard an interrupting cough from the door. Hinata turned her back to her sister and saw it was her father standing at the entrance. Bowing to him, she greeted him, Auto-sama. Now's my chance. Hanabi thought. She scoffed internally as she made to strike her sister. Had she really forgotten they were in a spar? Did she think father entering the room was enough of a reason to pause their battle? But the moment she was in range to strike, putting her full force behind the lunge, Hinata turned while bowing into Hanabi and ducked under her blow. She then used one arm to grab Hanabi's furthest shoulder and wrapped her leg in between Hanabi's before putting her full weight into her and twisting. The next thing Hanabi knew was she was looking at the ceiling with an incredible pain in her head and Hinata staring down at her with a hurt and disappointed expression. Is the victory in this spar so desperate, dear sister, that you would resort to such underhanded behavior? Hanabi just scowled at the words and went to get up when she found that she couldn't move her arms. I have disabled your arms at the shoulders. It's over, Hanabi. Before Hanabi could give a retort, a firm voice cut through the discourse. Indeed, it would seem so, stated Hayashi neutrally. It is good then, as I came to inform you that you should prepare for dinner. I have invited your sensei, Hinata, as well as Nijis to celebrate both of your progress and the joyous return of your uncle to us. Prepare accordingly. Hayashi turned to leave when he called back over his shoulder. Ko-si to Hanabi. Hinata. I suggest that you present you best. Kazuma-san has agreed to attend as well. Then he had left. He had barely walked 2 meters down the hall when the doors to the dojo burst open and an excited heiress raced down the other end of the hallway toward her room to prepare. Hayashi smiled to himself. He was liking this Haruki more and more as time went on. If this kept up, he may never be able to repay the man. Ko followed shortly, carrying an irritated Hanabi who seemed to be torn between brooding over her latest defeat or contemplating their coming guests. Perhaps it was time she evaluated this Haruki-sensei herself. Meanwhile, at the Hyuga compound, more specifically in the East Wing, Chief Elder Hinai was busy plotting with his fellow elders concerning the night's future events. Currently there were only 8 elders within the Hyuga main house in total. These included Hinobi, Kageri, Hizen, Yanyuda, Akimo, Kajiro and his wife Hashimi, and Hinai himself. Hinai was the oldest member at the age of 86, having married twice in his lifetime, and both of his spouses have long passed away, leaving him 5 children in total and twice as many grandchildren, all elite members of the main house and true Hyugas in every sense of the word. Hizen was the second oldest at the age of 82, he only married once in his life, the daughter of one of their clan's allies who passed away over 20 years ago, but not before leaving him several sons, each skilled users of the Byakugan. Akimo and Yanyuda were brothers, with Akio being the oldest by 3 years. Akimo was 80 while Yanyuda was 77 years old, and Yanyuda was the only one who married and had descendants, since Akimo never had the desire for a woman or child in his life. Hinobi was 70 years old and she was a widow, though there have been some rumors that her husband had pleaded for death to escape her before the Shinigami finally granted his wish, something Keisuke didn't find hard to believe. Hinobi was an old-fashioned and stubborn woman who only bore daughters, and both her son-in-laws were Mukoyoshis. Thankfully all of her grandchildren were born with the Byakugan. Kajiro and Hashimi were the only members that were still married, though their relationship has been strained for years now, not that either would admit it. Hashimi was a distant relative of Kajiro and their marriage was arranged despite their age difference. Kajiro was currently 75 years old while Hashimi was only 67, they had only 3 children in their union, 2 daughters and 1 son who were all grown and were jonin now. Kageri was the youngest of the 8 since he was 65 years old and had officially retired from the shinobi business after an injury from a mission left him with a limp and the need for a cane. He only had 1 child, a daughter named Bashi, who was married to a member of the Teiktorai clan, his wife having died on a mission 5 years ago. Hinai was currently reflecting on the situation while Hinobi, Kageri, Hizen, Yanyuda, Akimo, Kajiro and Hashimi discussed around him to form a strategy for tonight. Fortunately it seems that Hayashi was able to get this new jonin to attend the celebration. The one who was supposedly able to nullify their Byakugan. They were not fools. They understood the magnitude of the threat of a jutsu like this existing. And if some no-name unheard of jonin had the ability, then who's to say there were not more out there who did? They had first heard of this ability after questioning Hinata about her training session the day she first defeated her sister. They initially had only been curious as to the circumstances and teachings that had seemed to inspire a shift in the heiress for the better. It was in her detailed recounting of the events of her training session that day that gave them initial cause for alarm. First, none of them had ever heard of this jonin or had any memory of him previously. This had of course led them to do some inquiries where they discovered that the jonin had supposedly been on a mission for the last 8 years and had only returned just prior to the recovery of the clan head's brother with his miraculous escape. Upon this revelation, many of the elders had exploded in fits of worry. It was obvious to tell that given the timing of things, the man had had something to do with Hisashi's return. And despite many of the elders being grateful for the presumed help of the Jonin, all of them also took note that he must have been in Como of all places these past 8 years. Which lead to the questions: did this man steal this jutsu from Como? Had they already cracked the secret of the Byakugan? If not, was he seen using it by others? What were the details surrounding the jutsu? How had he developed it without a Hyuga, or did he study Hisashi before freeing him? All these and more had plagued them, and so, as a second course of action, they took their concerns to Hayashi upon his return from the late council meeting. That did not give them the results they were wanting. Hayashi had sternly recommended to them to keep all speculation of Haruki's activities to themselves. He expressed that both Hisashi and Hayashi had great trust for the village's newest seal master and new head of the sealing and barrier corps. He further clarified that the man was of the highest quality and skill, even beating out Jiraiya for the position. Naturally, this revelation only further incited their concern, yet even after insisting further, the elders were only told that Hayashi was unable to discuss any further details as those were classified by the meeting. This left the elders with very little information to satisfy their concerns. Now all they knew was that some Jonin was now head of 2 departments with all the personal skill and political power that entailed, who had the ability to neutralize their prize techniques, and was a seal master of the highest caliber. This normally, though concerning, would not have them as panicked if not for the declaration Hinata made against her sister. Only those who don't even try are slave to fate. This one thought is what had the 8 of them sitting in this room. For if their fears proved true, it could spell the end for all that they knew. Fate was an idea the clan had used to justify its customs for years. Now few of the elders actually believed on something so silly, but the power of the philosophy was lost on no one. The truth was that fate was one of the tools used to ensure the cooperation and stability of the Hyuga's 2-house system. The branch house were fated to protect the main house, and the main house was fated to provide for and guide the branch house. This of course were not the core reasons for the system, but those reasons avoided challenge by using this clan ideal as a shield. They incorporate this philosophy even into their intimidation tactics towards their enemies. This subliminal reinforcement of the status quo had served to stabilize the clan even through situations as controversial as the Hyuga incident all those years ago. Hisashi even reinforced it by providing an example of performing your fated duty while still using your will. And yet, now there was a politically and personally powerful Jonin that has the head of the clan indebted to him, returned the hero and leader of the branch house to them, with extreme Fuinjutsu prowess, had shown a lack of fear in countering Hyuga techniques, and now had knowingly or not attacked a foundational ideal of their clan structure. There was only one thing to concluded: the cage-bird seal was threat. Of course, they could not prove this, not yet at least, but it was too great a risk not to investigate. This left them with one final option. If the leadership, or at least some of it, was now blind to the danger this posed to the clan, then they would have to address it themselves. However, thankfully at least the majority still hadn't lost sight. This is becoming very tiresome, Akimo said in an annoyed voice as they had been discussing the situation in almost a circle for hours. You sound like one of those lazy Nara men, brother, Yanyuta said, smirking at his brother's glare. Both of you focus, we have business to take care of, Hinai said sternly to the pair of brothers. Remember that tonight we have to gather as much information on this Kazama Haruki as we can. Hinai reminded his fellow elders. We already know that, Hinai. Just because we're old doesn't mean our memory is foggy, at least mine isn't, Hinobi said snobbishly while the other men in the group glared at her or rolled their eyes. Be serious. We can't let this opportunity pass us. Need I remind you of what danger this could pose for our clan? Not just this technique or where it came from, but what the hidden agenda could potentially be, Hinai said sternly to the snobbish woman in their little group. The end of the caged bird seal, was all Hinai said that had everyone paying close attention. They knew that their entire clan structure and philosophy was at stake here, not to mention the immediate danger of a potential foreigner and spy having the means to counter the basis of their fighting style. It was no secret that Hayashi and at least one of his daughters had no love for the practice that protect the clan for most of its long history. Probably one of the primary reason the seal was still in practice was because there was currently no alternative and no way of undoing the seal work. But given the appearance of this new pawn on the board, that could easily change. They knew that time was not on their side, as they would not have the power of numbers to stop Hinata if she became heir to the clan. Assuming she retained the views she claimed now, though they never really considered this would happen until the appearance of Haruki and the result exchange between Hinata and Hanabi. The question wasn't if the practice would be attacked but when. We must determine the man's intentions and gather as much of his history as we can. Then we can decide how best to approach the situation. Hinai said evenly and ignored the scoffs from Hinobi. I still believe we should go to the Hokage over it. By law, if we feel a jutsu has been designed to target us, we have the right to insist it be added to the Forbidden Scroll. And how dare Hayashi even invite the man to eat in our home after we voiced or very reasonable objections? Hinobi said with a sour expression on her face, and Hinai resisted the urge to roll his eyes, which in the Hyuga family meant he was really getting annoyed now. Will you stop that, Hinobi? That should be our last course of action. Given his quick rise to power, it's evident he has the backing of the Hokage. Hokage is not our biggest fan considering how many times we've blocked his attempts to remove the seal practice. By demanding he not interfere in clan affairs no less. He would laugh at such a request and demand the strongest evidence, which we have none of. That is the purpose of tonight. This may be our only chance to preserve our traditions before Shinigami comes for us. Hinai said darkly, getting Hinobi out of it. Just be grateful that he's chosen to attend tonight to give us the opportunity. It doesn't how, Kajiro said seriously to the uppity old woman, who scoffed and muttered something incoherent. Hinai maintained his cool exterior, but on the inside he was fuming. He wasn't going to let this golden opportunity pass him. He didn't care how long it took or what he would have to say or do in order to secure the younger generation tonight, but he was going to make sure that their family traditions remained. Only then would he be able to die in peace. He wasn't a fool. He knew he didn't have much time left before his death. He was very old and his body was starting to feel the effects of his age. He was still as sharp as he ever was during his prime, but he also knew that it was his only real weapon left. Anyway, let's go over the strategy for tonight, Hinai said in a calm voice as he explained his ideas to his brethren, who all nodded in agreement. Even if he might not live long enough to see the next clan head, he would still die content knowing that his clan's greatest tradition was secured. Needless to say, tonight should be very interesting for the entire clan. All that was left of the day was the subtle glow of the fading sun in the far west when the group of sensei arrived at the gates to the Hyuga compound. The majority of the journey had been in quiet contemplation and idle chatter of no real significance, each just enjoying the company of the others. Upon arriving, they were immediately recognized by the guards and admitted through the main outer gates of what was almost a village in and of itself inside of Konoha. Though not as remote as the Uchiha district had been, the Hyuga did like their privacy, which was ironic considering their own famous abilities. The architecture and accents of the complex were quite lavish but functional enough to display both wealth and power, but also shinobi discipline. It was after they crossed the main courtyard and approached the stairs to the main meeting house that they encountered their host. Hayashi Hyuga was pleasantly surprised to find that all members had dressed accordingly for a function of this gravity and magnitude. He almost broke into a smile when he noticed that they had even brought gifts, which was a less honored custom in more recent times. He had his suspicions for why all the pomp and circumstance that was out of character considering the contents of the guest party approaching him. But for the time being he would elect to watch and wait. There were many plans and peace in play after all. It was when the company reached the top of the stairs that he spoke. Greetings Mito-san, Yuhi-san, Kazamadano, welcome to my home. He greeted with a small bow of his head and stretching his arms to the side. Haruki, who was flanking Kurenai on her right, responded first as was custom if the host acknowledges you as of highest respect of the visiting company. Bowing his head, the redhead replied, "Thank you Hyuga-dano. We are greatly honored by your invitation and have happily brought gifts of our own to honor the celebration." Finishing, they each extended the various packages to Hayashi, who was doing his best not to smile at the over-control movements and behavior of the redhead. This was obviously his idea. Graciously Hayashi accepted them and motioned a branch member guard to collect them and take them to his office. "You have my thanks for your consideration. You have arrived just in time as all has been made ready. If you will follow me, I will escort you myself to the dining hall." Seeing their nods of acknowledgement, Hayashi turned and guided them into main hall and past the tiled mosaic entryway into the dining area. The dining hall from their entrance opened onto a raised platform where a long table was set up. Below the platform, which could be almost considered a stage the majority of the rest of the room had many smaller tables that could sit 6 each comfortably. When they entered, they found everything already set and what seemed to be the entirety of the available Hyuga clan waiting for them, main and branch house. They could see a few branch house members serving the needs of the rest, but none had touched the food that was brought in. It appeared they really were exactly on time. The head table, which was parallel to the entryway, was completely full, with only the close right side having any seats left. The end seat, presumably Hayashi's seat, was vacant, and next to him sat Hizashi on his right and Hanabi on his left. Next to Hizashi sat Niji with an empty seat next to him, before then an old man Haruki didn't recognize. Next to Hanabi was an empty seat, and then Hinata, then another empty seat, and then another elder Haruki presumed. The rest of the seats were filled by the remaining elders. Upon entering the room, the entirety of the hall, which had been murmuring quietly amongst themselves, went silent. Hizashi, who had been listening to Niji tell him some story, abruptly stood upon seeing them. This naturally caused the others at the table to look in the same direction. Niji stood with his father even as Hinata and Hanabi turned around to face the others. Seeing her sensei Hinata also stands smiling broadly, Hayashi, pleased the attention given, proceeds to make their guest's proclamation. It is my pleasure to present our honored guests this evening. Mitogai Taijutsu Master, Jonin of Konohagakure and Sensei to Genin Team 9 that Niji is a part of. Yuhi Kurinai, Genjutsu Master, Jonin of Konohagakure and Sensei to Genin Team 8 that Hinata is a part of. And finally, Kazama Haruki, Seal Master, Jonin of Konohagakure, head of the Barrier Corps, head of the Sealing Division, and mentor to both Hinata and Niji. Please give them welcome with me tonight. The entire room applauded as Hayashi guided them to their seats. Haruki sat between Hinata and Hanabi, Guy next to Niji and Kurinai next to Hinata. Once they had reached their seats, the applause died down and those standing other than Hayashi sat down. Hayashi stood and waited at the head of the table while angling himself toward the crowd to deliver his welcome address. When he was sure he had everyone's attention, he began. Welcome everyone to this celebration of the bright future of the Hyuga clan. We are here tonight for two purposes. One is to celebrate the safe return of my brother Hizashi to us. And the other, the teachers who worked tirelessly to train and grown the leaders of the Hyuga future. Most would think these two to be unrelated, but in truth they are both reminders of what is truly important. The future. And so together we celebrate the accomplishments of those who have given so much for the village and reward their service to our clan and to Konoha. May the will of fire continue to shine brightly in their hearts. Let the dinner begin. And as he sat, the room applauded and began serving themselves from the food that was delivered to their tables. In that moment, it was as if a spell was broken and the heavy formal tension disappeared into the air. Of course this did not mean much considering it was still a Hyuga dinner, but the three guests felt they could relax at least a little bit. Well, most of them. Hayashi could tell that Haruki was still very guarded. Which only further reminded him of what he had managed to get from his brother earlier that day when he had voiced his thoughts on the evening. You must understand, Haruki is secretive, and for good reason. The man has been through things the majority of Konoha could never even begin to imagine. I don't know much myself, but I know that the man could use support. If you try to get answers from him, just understand that it won't be easy, and if you want his help, be prepared to let answers lie where they do. Well, all that can be done now is to try. Hayashi noted as he took stock of his plan. He knew he was playing a subtle game with pieces that weren't even his against the elders, even if they hadn't realized the full extent yet. But for his plan to work, he needed to test the redhead first. Besides, he really was curious about the man. So as they dug into their meal as much as you can at a Hyuga formal dinner, and after introducing the others at the table, Hayashi began his plan. So Haruki Dano, if I may call you that, I was told by Yuhi-san today when delivering her invitation that you will be attending my daughter's training session again this week. Is that correct? The redhead looked up from his food and sent a sidelong look at Kurinai, then turned to Hayashi, though not without catching Hinata's hopeful look. Yes, though there is no need for an honorific, Hayashi-sama. But to answer your question, though it will not be tomorrow, I will be attending one later this week. Hayashi nodded in acceptance before continuing, I see. Would it be all right with you then, if I attended? I would like to compare the experience to today's session. Haruki of course caught the unstate question, how have you changed my daughter? And was only slightly surprised by the request. That would be up to Hinata and Kurinai to decide, but I have no issue with it. Translation, see for yourself. Hayashi seemed to have caught his meaning as he nodded before deferring to Kurinai first. I have no problem with you attending, Hayashi-sama. The raven-haired woman replied. She was beginning to sense something else was at play here, and if she was right, then she was prepared to play her part. I fully back Haruki's role. It was then that Haruki turned and looked at the young heiress, who looked like she was doing everything she could to keep from trembling as all eyes turned to her. Well, Hinata-chan. Would it be okay if Dad came and trained with us? Hinata looked up and around at all the eyes on her as if searching for something before landing on a set of cerulean pools. And in those eyes she found one resounding statement. I have complete confidence in you. All you have to do is try. And in that moment Hinata made her decision. She took a deep breath and straightened her posture and looked past Haruki directly into her father's stone eyes. Otasama can come, she said without any hesitation or so much as a tremble. I will show you. Genuinely smiling Haruki turned back to face Hayashi, then shouldn't be a problem. See, I told you. The rest of the table that was not caught in idle chatter was surprised at the shift. Well, all but Kurenai and Guy. They just smiled. Hayashi, though internally was impressed, kept his stony exterior intact before replying with a nod of approval. Good. Should I expect to see the same that I saw today? Is she like Niji? Understanding the subcontext, Haruki shakes his head. There are some things I still need to clear with Kurenai. Without revealing details prematurely, I can confirm that though their problems may be different, I do intend to treat and aid them all at the same level. Different problems, same expectations, same resources. It was then that an elder entered the conversation for the first time, Akimo if he wasn't mistaken. How do you say that, Haruki-san? From the years we have watched them grow, Hinata and Niji have never been equal. Is it perhaps due to her teammates? Internally, the man was patting himself on the back. The question was a trap. If Haruki denied the claim in favor of Hinata, it would demonstrate to Niji that the man was favoring the main house and undo the feelings of loyalty while reinforcing the doctrine of fate. However, if he sided with Niji, then it would destroy Hinata's newfound confidence and the heir they wanted would have the advantage again. It was a lose-lose question. Or so he thought. Haruki frowned at the question, perfectly aware the point of it, and what the elder was trying to do. So, they were already trying to make their move. This exact circumstance was why he hated situations like this. He'd much rather beat the crap out of the old idiot than have a war of words, but over the years he had people like Shikamaru and Hinata to allow him to learn the political game. If a war of words is what they wanted, then he was more than a match for them. Aware all eyes were on him, Haruki began his counter-move. Both Hinata and Niji have great skill and talents that express themselves in variant way from each other. And though I may hold high standards for the both of them, it will be up to their own will to accomplish the goals that are set. To this end it is important for myself, their respective sensei and all leaders that directly engage them to enable and empower them to push through their own limits. I'm sure I can speak for the other sensei in appreciating your help in this, elder. I have great confidence that both of them will continue to make great progress so long as they continue to try. Haruki could clearly see the small smile form on Niji's face and could guess without looking how Hinata felt. Dart one dojed. Haruki thought to himself. Both Hizashi and Hayashi, who had quietly observed the exchange as they ate, couldn't help but respect the redhead for turning the question back on the elder. Perhaps this would work after all. They were not the only ones though that sensed the subtle war. Both Jonin sensei were now on high alert after that exchange. Nodding discreetly to each other, having figured out the real purpose they had been invited. If Hayashi wanted them to support Haruki, he didn't really even need to ask. Guy decided he would take this one. Yes, we are all a part of the nurturing of the youthful future of our students. The boisterous man all but shouted. This seemed to prompt something from Haruki as his posture jerked as if just remembering something. Hayashi-sama, I meant to tell you that I have approved all of the applications that were submitted to the program at various levels. In a week or so, my office will be in touch with the information to begin their coursework with an outline of their basic function within the core depending on their level. I thought I would deliver yours, Niji's, Hizashi's and Hinata's in person. It was then that the reed had brought out of his sleeve 4 envelopes. Each addressed to the aforementioned ninja. Niji and Hinata each seemed surprised at the news, which led Haruki to believe that they had been told of their applications being submitted. Not that he cared, as he wanted both of them to have at least a basic knowledge of seals, if not better. It would make it easier to one day get rid of the caged bird seal for them, which was a goal he knew they shared. Before Haruki could do more than hand them their acceptance letters, though a deliberate borderline snobbish cough caught his attention. The female elder named Hinobi had apparently decided to make a move herself. Secretly, the other elders all groaned internally at the possible stupidity that was about to come out of her mouth. Pardon me, Haruki-san, but do you really believe that the branch members will have the skill requirements to succeed in the program? the elder said as she flicked open a fan to fan herself. She thought this particular question was rather clever as it would determine Haruki's opinion of the branch house. The rest of the elder council just groaned internally at the fact that she had just revealed much of their intention to try and confirm information they already knew. Of course there was no stopping the pig-headed women when she thought she was right. Haruki just looked at her as if she had grown a second head and didn't bother hiding exactly what he thought of that question. Well, considering I have given them admittance, yes? I'm sorry Elder-san, I'm not sure I understand your question. Their ability to use Fuinjutsu isn't determined by their house of origin. Not liking the condescending tone of the red-head upstart Hinobi decided to take it a step further. I see. Well, I presume then that Hayashi has informed you of a level cap for their education. Immediately upon the words leaving her mouth, the feel of the room completely changed. The temperature seemed to have dropped and the air itself seemed to hum in warning. It was obvious to those sitting at the table the cause of the change. The branch member guards did not move as they had been instructed to do nothing unless actually violence took place. But they all watched intently as the tiniest fraction of chakra escaped the red head. Elder, you overstep, I or the Hokage alone determine such decisions. No one else. I trust you to remember that. The redhead replied, stormy eyes piercing directly into Hinobi's opaque ones. The old bat, despite her general stubbornness, was more than capable of realizing when she had made an error. There was a reason besides age. She was an elder after all. Forgive me. She began bowing her head in apology. I am just surprised is all. I trust Hayashi-sama to discuss the details more with you. Haruki knew that was all the concession he was going to get, so he relented and the irritating presence disappeared. The display of power had also been a message that he was deserving at least in part of the rank and position he currently wielded. He knew they would be a bit more careful from here on out. Or so he thought. Conversation turned to lighter things for a time as the meal progressed, with even the children chiming in a bit to tell training stories. It was during this more relaxed time of mingling that the next elder worked up the courage to ask Haruki a question. Hashimi was not as brash as the others were and she didn't really have a grudge against Haruki, but she couldn't deny the concerns of the others, so he decided that his question would try and accomplish both. After all, if he really was a Konoha shinobi of the caliber suggested, then he really should be welcomed and aided, not simply interrogated. Well, Haruki-san, how have you enjoyed being back? She asked suddenly as the jonin finished his plate. He seemed to jump a little at the question but quickly calmed as he turned to face her. Hashimi chuckled lightly beside herself. I am sorry if my question startles you, but none of us had heard of you, so we naturally were curious. Please forgive the intrusion, but all we learned was that you have been away from the village for some time. The cerulean gaze seemed to take on a deeper tone as Haruki weighed her words. Hashimi really had meant them and the shift was not lost on her. Nor was it lost on Hizashi or his brother. It's been nice. Came the soft and hesitant reply from a subdued Haruki that seemed to zone out for a moment before focusing back on the elder when she followed up his answer. Are things much as you remember them? She asked, a bit concerned, trying to steer the conversation to something more positive. There was no doubt something was there. Something deep, dark and painful. Though she did want answers and intentions from the man, she didn't want them at the expense of his heart. No. He replied with absolute certainty. He then turned and looked at Niji, who was trying not to giggle at something Guy had said while being equally as embarrassed. They are much better, he finished, turning back to her with a bit of a spark in his eyes. Smiling, Hashimi replied in sympathy to the wounded man who was no doubt trying to adjust back into village life and quickly given his new responsibilities. That certainly is a long time to be away, but surely you have friends and relatives that you could come home to. And just as the word left her mouth, she regretted them as any light that had been in his eyes winked out of existence as if it was never there. Hizashi, who was looking on, wanted to intervene and steer the conversation away, but knew that if he did he would be showing his hand to the elders and his brother, something he was sure would be worse for Haruki. Here was the many who had saved him and was now saving his son, who had endured the death of a world and gone back to go through it all over again, and he wasn't helping in the slightest. No more, I will not let him carry this burden alone. I am a branch member of the Hyuga clan and proud Konoha Jonin, and most importantly, I am his friend. I will not leave him to fight the battles I should be fighting with him. Hizashi vowed to himself as he looked at his son. He knew what he had to do, but for now he would have to wait. I would gladly do it again for the sake of the village, as I'm sure you would. Came the hollow but resolute reply from the red-headed Jonin, and it was the truth. Haruki would make the same choice again and again if it meant he had this chance. Hishomi knew she was already dancing on the pieces of a broken heart, but her curiosity got the better of her and thought perhaps she could cause him to have some positive memories surface. Who, may I ask, was your sensei? Haruki-san. All of my teachers are dead, was the quick and blunt reply, and he did not say anything more than that, and this time he had the audience of the entire table. Hishomi, feeling guilty for allowing things to reach this point, decided to cut her losses and repair what damage she could. The others could do as they pleased. She wanted no more part of this. I am sorry to hear this, Haruki-san. Forgive me for bringing up undue pain. I am sure though they were quite powerful to train a shinobi as strong as yourself. They are no doubt proud of you. She finished with a small encouraging smile that wasn't characteristic of her, but she thought this occasion warranted some kindness. Unexpectedly, she got a follow-up reply from the redhead, who just stared down at the table as if lost in his own head and unaware that they were not the only people left in the room. Proud of me? I don't know. Though I guess I'd like to think so. And it's alright you didn't know. Regardless of their skill, they taught me what was important. What it meant to be a shinobi in a world full of hate and how to move past it. It was them that instilled in me the will of fire, and they that told me to never give up. So long as I do that, I can honor their memory. Guy and Kurenai each made a mental note on the vagueness and conviction of Haruki's answer, but also the wording. Something rang familiar in those words. Little did they know it was Hinata of all people that had put it together. Although she didn't have even an inkling as to the significance, just like Naruto-kun. She thought. The resulting reflective silence did not last long, however. Well, on a happier topic, how have you been adjusting to your new position? Kageri asked, eager to move on in their line of questioning. The shift in topic did seem to relieve the mood, and the redhead returned to his blank-faced neutrality. The work is intense for the time being, as would be expected in founding any new department, but I am more than capable of handling it. Deciding now was the time to make his move. The elder pressed his advantage. I'm sure you are. Word has reached us that you have already formed a new seal. One that can render you invisible even to us. And so they had reached the heart of the issue. Or at least part of it, Haruki imagined. He knew this was a risk in using the technique. Niji and Hinata both flinch at the elder's comment, and neither looked at Haruki, unsure of what his reaction might be. Ha ha ha, well, laughter was not one of them. I am unaware of any seal that can turn someone invisible completely. Though I suppose it wouldn't be too hard to make. The redhead replied with a wink to both Niji and Hinata. He really couldn't and wouldn't blame them for what was happening. Kageri, feeling he was being mocked, scowled before insisting, Are sure? I could have sworn it was said you had a seal that could block. He didn't get to finish his though as Haruki cut him off. If you are referring to the jutsu I used in both Hinata and Niji's training, then yes, I have that capability. But that isn't a jutsu just anyone can do, and is primarily used shield chakra signatures. It is from my personal repertoire and not something I openly discuss, as I'm sure you can understand, elder. Haruki said, stressing the point that he wasn't going to discuss the details of the jutsu. Hayashi, who could see the mounting tension, tried to deflect the focus. I have personally seen the effects of this jutsu. I'm sure it will be a powerful training tool for Niji and Hinata. It already has given result, if I'm not mistaken. He said, look from Hinata to the elder in question. Be that as it may, Hayashi weak Kageri began, but was cut off again when Haruki interrupted him pointedly. Elder, I do believe a conversation along the lines that you are leading is appropriate for a different setting. However, if you insist on pressing the issue, I would be forced to conclude that you mean me ill will for an ability you feel threatened by. If you doubt my loyalty so much that I would actively use this ability against you personally in an improper way, then I would recommend you take your concerns to the Hokage. Saying this, the redhead stood up as if to leave before bowing to Hayashi. Hayashi, I am sorry to have shamed your house as to arrive and dine with such distrust prevalent against me among its members. It was here that Hinai, who had been quiet the entire evening electing to observe, decided to run damage control. His final test was not ready yet. Besides, Kageri was wrong to hint at accusations at the diner. This Haruki was very familiar with political maneuvers, it would seem. Forgive my compatriot's rudeness, Kazuma-san. Hinai began. I'm afraid that he has acted out of disrespect due to the sensitivity of the issue. There are very few jutsu in the history of the clan's existence that could come close to the feat of which you claim, and it has startled a few nerves, I'm afraid. The question was not made in insult. Hinai smiled to himself as he watched Haruki take a seat, having blocked his move to escape with the upper hand. You see, the Hyuga's status of being one of the strongest clans in the village has come from the discipline to tradition. Through these traditions we avoid many of the problems that arise in a tumultuous world. One such tradition is the Jukan fighting form that is the basis of our clan. It is this perfected form, this tradition, that makes us who we are. I am sure you can agree that our consistency has allowed us to repeatedly produce shinobi of advanced caliber able to defend the village. It is unsettling anytime something threatens that stability. Those traditions that make us who we are what we fight for. I'm sure you can understand. Hinata paused here to let his words sink in. He had one now. If Haruki accepted his words he was excusing their philosophy, and if he didn't he would be seen as unreasonable. And then, Niji asked a question for the first time that evening. Do you believe in fate, Haruki-san? Is tradition truly better than change? He asked, staring into Haruki's deep blue eyes with an intense need that was frightening. This boy needed an answer. Haruki thought for a moment as he tilted his head sideways a bit before looking at Niji in complete calm. Yes, Niji, fate is real, but it's not as particular as some would suggest. There is only one fate, and it's the one every person shares. The fate of all men is death, but how you get there is by the choices you make. While I value tradition, tradition for its own sake is never good. Change is an inevitable fact of life. It is what allows growth. It happens, because despite how we like to think, no two moments are alike and no two people are alike, and as time exchanges both, the world around us changes. Haruki paused here for a moment, letting his words sink in before continuing despite the frown on the elders' faces. When I was young, about your age actually, I fought this bastard who was utterly convinced the every moment of his life was determined for him and that victory was fated to him due to his near effortless skill in combat. I took many years of painful meaningless living before a young genin that was completely talentless managed to best his arrogant ass in front of an entire crowd. And it was then that he finally learned the true role of fate and began to live his own life. A seed is planted and grows fresh green leaves, and while it remains a tree, it grows with time to become strong to resist the storms of summer and winter's biting chill. With each passing season, the leaves grown from green to red and then finally fade to nurture the tree again next year. So Niji, I believe the question you've asked is a false one. It is important to have a ninja way to fight for, a code to anchor yourself to when the world as you know it changes completely. That is the tradition you need. But at the same time, if you do not change at least a little with it, you'll find that life is not so forgiving. Niji slowly nodded before sinking back in his chair, seemingly deep in thought. Haruki caught the look on Guy's face that said he knew what he was referencing at, that he would be answering for that later. Hinata was not pleased with this turn of events but had a planted test just in case, and with a quick signal to the crowd his plan was enacted. One of the branch members, an 13-year-old Kunoichi, who was on serving duty for the event, was called over to a main house table to serve some more sake. En route, however, she stumbled as one of the main house boys stood up abruptly and she ended up spilling it all over him. The boy was a 16-year-old chunin of Hinobi's brood and had a superiority complex the size of the Hokage monument. How dare you! He screeched as the sake landed on his silk robe. I am so sorry, Hamori-sama, it was an accident. As she attempted to clean up the mess before she was thrown back by the boy. You will pay for your insolence, he declared in his rage. His hands already forming the dreaded activation hand seal. Please no, it won't happen, Arif. The girl screamed and began to shake in an uncontrolled fit, clawing at her head as the seal flared to life. The boy had a sick smile of satisfaction. This will teach her, he thought, and then in the next moment all he knew was pain. Meanwhile, at the head table just before the incident, Hayashi sees the hand signal from Hinata and given the situation has fairly good idea what he has planned. Deciding he to want to see the reaction, he does not stop what would likely turn into a hostile situation quickly. Little did he know just how right he was. Arg! He heard her scream and immediately the entire room looked to the incident while the branch members including his brother flinch at the sight of the seal's activation. What was worse was they could see the boy smiling as he was issuing his judgment. Not a second later though did a presence of pure rage make itself known. The air around them dropped in temperature so low, Hayashi could see his breath. The air itself began to hum and vibrate as sparks started appearing around the room. And the sheer pressure that appeared was enough to root most of the room in place. A moment later then beside the young man appeared a certain redhead jonin, fist cocked and aimed right for his face. Upon making contact, the face of the boy split and rippled before launching him across the length on the hall and slamming him into the stone structure, causing it to crack. If the boy was alive, it was barely. It would appear though that Haruki wasn't quite done yet though, as a sealess solid copy of himself appeared and kneeled down next to the girl, hands glowing green, while the original walked calmly toward the body that was now stuck in the wall. The pressure and intensity of the chakra had not abated over the several seconds that the event took place, but as the Jonin walk over, those with more experience began to acclimate and move. Most moved away, wanting completely out of the way of the man. A few followed behind to see what he would do. Hayashi himself and the elders recovered enough to head to the boy themselves to assess the damage. When they arrived, they found the red head with glowing green hands on the boy's face, though he stopped shortly before they arrived. The second thing they noticed was a seal on the side of his neck that pulsed an angry red. "What have you done?" Hinobi screeches as she rushes forward to the now prone form of her grandson. "He will live. I repaired any life-threatening damage, the rest is all him." Haruki spat coldly with venom as he rounded on the elders. How could you watch on as this piece of shit tortured a young girl for spilling a drink on him by accident?" When they remained silent, Haruki's chakra spiked. "Explain yourselves. Now." "Haruki-san, this is a clan matter, and from our understanding of the situation, he was well within his rights to do what he did, and you interrupted clan affairs and abused your authority to harm one of our clan's men for carrying out his right in our home. And you did so as guests, no less. We are not intimidated so easily, boy. I suggest you leave before we have you arrested," replied Hizen, who was looking a little too smug. Haruki turned and looked at the elder. "That's where you are wrong, fool, and you idiots thought you could plant a situation you could control, but you made one critical error. Not only was the girl you allowed to be targeted a shinobi of the village, but she was also just accepted into the barrier corps. No doubt trying to escape the cruelty here. As such, she falls under my jurisdiction twice over. And I am therefore responsible in part for her safety, and well, clan and its traitorous as backward ways are not going to stand any longer. I may not have the authority to remove the seal or stop you from placing it on people, but your use of it as a disciplinary measure is something I sure as hell am not going to continue to tolerate. And since you felt the need to question my authority, how about a bit of a demonstration?" Haruki then gestures to the boy on the ground. Specifically his neck. "You see that seal on his neck? That seal will give him twice the pain that girl endured to his entire nervous system if so much as molds chakra to walk up a tree. This restraint seal shall remain on his person pending a trial by the village council for his assault on a kunoichi of the village. Your rights as a clan allow you to discipline your own using the seal only when rules have actually been broken. And since I suspect this incident was an inside setup, I hereby bar any person suspected of playing a part from the sealing program and placed on the barrier corps watch list. In addition, I will be recommending a full investigation by the Hokage into the disciplinary records of the clan. And if such acts of cruelty are committed in my presence again, I swear to you the last concern you will have is a Hokage investigation." Haruki finished with a dark glower and leaked some killing intent for good measure. This of course did not go over well with the most of the elders. "How dare you accuse us of harming our own unduly? And as a guest of our house no less. Hayashi, throw him out. He is no longer welcome here." One of them said, though it was hard to tell as most of them were shouting over each other. "Silence!" Hayashi yells. "That is quite enough out of you," he says forcefully at the elders. Then turning to Haruki he sighs before asking calmly, "Haruki-dano, I give you my word this will be dealt with severely within the clan, and I have no objections to your other restrictions, but I must insist on asking that you remove the restraint seal from the Hamori-san. Please." Considering the situation at hand, that was actually a very generous way to ask. Though Haruki was still not quite feeling up for it. "Do it, Kit. The last thing you need is to antagonize these bastards further. Kurama, he doesn't deserve it." "That may be true, but right now you don't have the authority to put that on him without the Hokage's order for capture. Hayashi is doing you a favor. I don't like it, but trust him to handle it for now." "Fine, but I don't like it," Haruki answered in an internal huff. Haruki outwardly nods to Hayashi and walks over past the sobbing Hinobi and places his hand on the boy's neck for a moment before removing it, and the seal is gone. Nodding, Hayashi turns to the elders. "I believe enough trouble has been caused to our guests tonight. You are dismissed along with others that would like to leave. We will discuss this tomorrow. I expect everyone's full participation and cooperation." Having said his piece, Hayashi calls over 2 guards and have them take the boy to the infirmary before turning and apologizing to the other guests for the incident. "Haruki-san, considering tonight's event, would you mind if I spoke to you privately for a few minutes in my office?" Hayashi asked now that the mess had been cleaned up. In the meantime, I'm sure the others would not mind some dessert. This is supposed to be a celebration after all. Haruki looked hesitant at first before turning to his two compatriots that had stayed out of his way during the whole exchange but were ready to step in at any point. Both gave their nods of consent, and based on the looks they gave him, he knew they would be waiting for him to return before leaving. And so, Hayashi escorted Haruki out of the hall through a courtyard garden and past a small library to his office. That's it for part 9. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.